The Grand Archive of Xylos wasn't so much a building as it was a monument to 7 centuries of failure. It was a vast, sterile sphere of polished chrome and shimmering energy fields, hanging in the silent void between two gas giants. Inside, the air, meticulously scrubbed of all but the most essential molecules, hummed with the sound of computational engines the size of small moons. This was the most expensive, most prestigious, and most profoundly embarrassing project in the history of the Galactic Concordance. At its heart, floating in a cascade of shimmering containment fields, was the reason for it all, the Omen. High Proctor Vex, a being whose crystalline form refracted the sterile light of the chamber into 1,000 tiny rainbows, regarded the artifact with an expression of pure intellectual agony. His species, the Xyler, communicated through resonating frequencies in their crystalline structures, but for the sake of the lesser organics present, he projected his thoughts as crisp, condescending audio. The 73rd computational cycle is approaching termination. Preliminary results indicate another null-state paradox. The logic gates of the precursors remain obstinate. Beside him, Grand Marshal Kthar of the Grochner species shifted his immense weight from 2 of his 4 feet to the other 2. His hide was a tapestry of ritual scars and armored plates, and his voice was the sound of bedrock grinding together. Logic, he rumbled. His lower set of arms crossed over his massive chest, while his upper set gestured dismissively at the floating puzzle. You have tried to think it open for 700 years, Proctor. I still maintain that a precisely applied kinetic strike with a macrocannon would yield more fruitful results. As it yielded the last 17 times you suggested it, Marshal? Vex's projected voice was dry as dust, resulting in a feedback loop that nearly vaporized this entire station and sent your finest shock troops into a temporary state of quantum non-existence? No, the Omen is a test of intellect, not brute force. Ringing his gelatinous pseudopods in a gesture of galactic-level anxiety was Administrator Zorp. Zorp was a quib, a creature that resembled a large, semi-transparent amoeba housed in a hovering environmental suit. His species governed through bureaucracy and overwhelming paperwork, and the Omen project was the single greatest stain on his otherwise immaculate record. Gentlemen, please. The Concordance is growing impatient. The funding reviews are becoming pointed. They are starting to use phrases like interminable fiscal black hole and a monument to hubris we need a breakthrough. The Omen itself paid them no mind. It was a polyhedron of impossible geometry, roughly the size of a shuttlecraft. Its surface was a chaotic lattice of shifting glyphs, glowing conduits, and interlocking components that seemed to phase in and out of reality. For 742 standard years, the greatest minds of the Concordance had thrown everything they had at it. They had used psionic choirs to try and divine its purpose, chronomancers to peer into its past, and fleets of supercomputers that had burned out their own cores trying to calculate the infinite permutations of its surface. All had failed. It was considered the ultimate puzzle box, left behind by the enigmatic precursors as a challenge, a key to their lost knowledge, and a gatekeeper to true galactic enlightenment. It was into this temple of sterile genius and epic failure that the universe decided to introduce a joke. The joke's name was Jake. When the transport docked and Jake stepped into the Grand Archive's reception chamber, the collective disappointment was a palpable force. Administrator Zorp's gelatinous form seemed to sag within his suit. Grand Marshal Kthar let out a low growl of disgust. High Proctor Vex simply ceased vibrating for a full 3 seconds, the Xyler equivalent of a stunned, horrified silence. The human was aggressively average. He was of medium height, with a soft paunch that spoke of a comfortable life rather than a challenging one. His hair was thinning at the crown, and he wore soft, flexible trousers, a faded shirt with a peculiar logo of a stylized alligator on it, and a zip-up fleece vest. His face was unremarkable, pleasant enough, with eyes that crinkled at the corners as he smiled a friendly, unassuming smile at the assembled aliens. He carried a small, worn leather satchel. "Jake Miller," he announced cheerfully, extending a hand before realizing none of the beings before him had anything resembling a hand to shake. He let it drop awkwardly. "I was told you had a tricky box." Zorp glided forward, his internal fluids swirling with embarrassment. "Mr. Miller, Welcome. I am Administrator Zorp. This is High Proctor Vex and Grand Marshal Kthar, he gestured vaguely. Your arrival is noted. The words were chosen carefully. Zorp had fought against this. The Sapient Diversity Outreach Initiative was a public relations move by the Concordance, a mandate that all major projects include input from newly contacted species. Humanity was one such species, a noisy, chaotic, primitive race of soft-bodied bipeds from a ludicrously hostile planet in the galactic hinterlands. They were considered a curiosity, a race of biological paradoxes who had somehow stumbled into space despite their comical fragility. Bringing one here was supposed to be a box-ticking exercise. No one was supposed to actually send one. Vex's voice echoed in the chamber, dripping with disdain. Its biological composition is inefficient. High water content. Pathetically narrow thermal tolerance. Its sensory organs are limited to a minuscule sliver of the electromagnetic spectrum. Administrator, are you certain this is the consultant we were promised? The initiative's charter is quite specific, Zorp mumbled, trying to project an air of authority he did not feel. All perspectives must be considered. Kthar took a step forward, his shadow falling over the human. Jake had to crane his neck to look up at the towering alien. The Grockner sniffed the air. It has no natural armor. No claws. Its teeth are blunt. It smells of processed plant fibers and faint anxiety. It would not survive a single rotation on my homeworld's nursery moon, he turned to Zorp. This is an insult to the memory of the precursors. We are trying to unlock the secrets of the cosmos, not entertain a pet. Jake just smiled patiently. Well, I can see you're all very passionate about your work. That's great. So this box. Can I see it? He used the word box again. Vex's crystalline structure tightened, emitting a sharp, angry chime. It is not a box, it is the Omen, a hyperdimensional artifact of unparalleled complexity. Its purpose is the fulcrum upon which the future of galactic civilization may pivot. Right? Tricky box. Jake nodded, unfazed. Lead the way. They led him to the central chamber. The sheer scale of the operation seemed to be lost on him. He walked past conduits pulsing with raw energy and data streams that would have flash-cooked the mind of a lesser being, his expression one of mild, tourist-like interest. When he finally stood before the Omen, floating in its shimmering cage of light, he didn't gasp in awe or recoil in terror. He just put his hands on his hips, tilted his head, and made a soft humming sound. Huh, he said after a long moment. Vex could stand it no longer. Huh? He projected, his voice sharp with a billion teraflops of processed indignation. Human, you stand before a construct that has defied the combined intellect of 1,200 star systems for over 7 centuries. Its surface logic is a cascade of non-Euclidean equations that operate on principles of quantum entanglement. The glyphs you see are not mere symbols. They are representations of fundamental cosmic constants that shift in response to the observer's own consciousness. We have modeled its behavior for generations. We have a saying among my people, as inscrutable as the heart of the Omen. Jake nodded thoughtfully, still looking at the object. We have a saying on my world too, he said. Did you try turning it off and on again? Silence. Kthar actually took a step back, as if the sheer stupidity of the question might be contagious. Zorp's internal fluids churned. Mr. Miller, we have, in a manner of speaking, done the equivalent of that on a transdimensional scale approximately 400 million times. The containment field is necessary. Any attempt to physically interact with the artifact without first solving the exterior energy matrix results in a significant defensive discharge. So it zaps you if you touch it? Jake clarified. A zap that can rewrite molecular bonds and has a theoretical energy potential equivalent to a small supernova, Vex corrected coldly. Yes, right, Jake said. He started walking a slow circle around the floating artifact, his soft-soled shoes making no sound on the polished deck. The 3 aliens watched him, their expressions a mixture of contempt, confusion, and a dawning, unwelcome sense of unease. He wasn't acting the way a primitive being should. He wasn't overwhelmed. He wasn't afraid. He looked thoughtful, like a man trying to figure out a crossword puzzle. Has anyone ever just knocked on it? Jake asked, stopping his circuit. Vex's resonant frequency rose in pitch, a sound of pure exasperation. We are not attempting to gain entry to a wooden hovel. It is a sealed, self-contained system. A percussive diagnostic would be meaningless. Humor me, Jake said with a shrug. He reached out a hand. Human, no? Zorp shrieked, his form jiggling violently. Kthar's hand, the size of a dinner plate, shot out to grab Jake's shoulder, but the human was quicker than he looked. He didn't touch it with his palm. He just flicked it with his middle finger, a quick, sharp little thump. A ripple of blue energy shot across the omen's surface. A deep, sonorous boom echoed through the chamber, and a wave of force threw the three aliens back several feet. Jake, at the epicenter, merely rocked back on his heels, his fleece vest fluttering in the displaced air. He rubbed his knuckle. He said again, a little louder this time. Solid. Definitely not hollow. That's good to know. Kthar picked himself up, his eyes wide. The human had withstood a force that would have dented the armor of a Grockner warrior. He had done it without flinching. The warrior's contempt was now tinged with a sliver of grudging confusion. What is that dark spot on the bottom there? Jake asked, pointing. Looks like a smudge. Vex reoriented his crystalline form, the maneuver of a being deeply unsettled. That is an anomaly we noted in the first century of study. It is a sector of the artifact's casing that does not emit energy and does not respond to logical probes. It is inert. A flaw in the manufacturing, perhaps. It is considered irrelevant to the solution. Irrelevant, Jake repeated, stroking his chin. He continued his slow walk around the object. You know, this reminds me of a puzzle box my grandfather had. A Japanese piece. Looked impossible. Had all these sliding panels and hidden buttons. Spent a week on it. Couldn't figure it out. You know what the trick was? None of them answered. They were too busy trying to reconcile the image of this soft, unimpressive creature with the casual defiance he was displaying. You had to put it in the freezer for an hour, Jake said with a grin. The wood would contract just enough for one of the panels to loosen. It wasn't about logic. It was about physics. Vex's internal lattice structure felt strained. The concepts were nonsensical. Logic was physics. Physics was logic. The universe was a grand equation. To suggest that a solution could be found through such a crude, environmental trick was heresy. Let me ask another question, Jake said, his tone still light and conversational. This thing is floating. Magnetic suspension, I'm guessing. A gravimetric field, precisely calibrated to negate local planetary and stellar influence. Vex corrected automatically. Right. So it's been floating in exactly this position for 700 years. Its orientation is absolute, Vex confirmed. We have maintained its spatial coordinates down to the Planck length. So nobody's ever looked at the bottom, Jake stated. It wasn't a question. We have scanned the bottom. Vex retorted. We have mapped every molecule. As I said, there is only the inert anomaly. But you haven't looked at it, Jake pressed gently. With your eyes. You ever get one of those kids' toys, the kind with the little ball in the maze? Sometimes you just have to flip it over to get the ball to the end. Kthar let out a frustrated snort. This is not a child's toy, isn't it? Jake asked, turning to face them. His pleasant smile was gone, replaced by a look of focused intensity that was far more unnerving. You've got a mysterious box from a long-gone, super-advanced race. It sits there, daring you to open it. It zaps you when you touch it. It ignores your smartest computers. If that's not the most elaborate please touch sign in the universe, I don't know what is. You've been treating it like a final exam. What if it's just a practical joke? He turned back to the Omen. Administrator, I need you to do something for me. I need you to lower the containment field. Zorp nearly dissolved into a puddle of panic. Absolutely not. The energy release would be catastrophic. Not all of it. Just the outer layer. The one that stops you from touching it, Jake said calmly. And then, I need you to reduce the power to the gravimetric field. Not off. Just less. Let it get a little heavy. For what purpose? Vex demanded. Your line of reasoning is erratic, primitive, and utterly without logical foundation. My logical foundation, Jake said, his voice quiet but firm, is that for 700 years, you've been trying to solve the problem you think you have. You've never stopped to ask if you're even asking the right question. He looked at Zorp, his gaze unwavering. Lower the fields. Please. There was a long, tense silence. Zorp looked at Vex, whose crystalline form was practically vibrating with rage. He looked at Kthar, whose warrior's instinct was warring with a lifetime of protocol. But then he looked at the human. There was no doubt in his eyes. Only a strange, unnerving confidence. The Concordants wanted a new perspective. Zorp was about to give them one. With a trembling pseudopod, he keyed a command into his wrist-mounted control panel. "I am logging a formal protest," Vex announced stiffly. "Let the record show I believe this course of action to be insane." With a hum that dropped in pitch, the outermost layer of the containment field dissolved into nothing. The air in the chamber suddenly felt thick, charged with potential. The omen seemed to loom larger, more menacing. Then, the gravimetric field weakened. The massive artifact, for the first time in centuries, settled downwards, its immense weight no longer completely negated. It drifted down a few inches, then stopped, held by the weakened field. "Good," Jake said, rubbing his hands together. "Now, I need a few things. I need a crowbar, a wedge, and a can of industrial lubricant." The request was so absurd, so brutally low-tech, that for a moment, no one knew how to respond. A crowbar. In the most advanced scientific facility in the galaxy. "We do not have a crowbar," Zorp stammered. "A lever, then," Jake said impatiently. "A long, sturdy piece of metal. And a wedge. Like a doorstop. And some oil. Anything slippery." Thar, against his better judgment, was intrigued. The human was talking about tools of leverage and force. This, at least, was a language the Grockner understood. He strode to a maintenance locker and, after a moment of rummaging, pulled out a meter-long titanium alloy support strut. "Will this suffice as a lever?" "Perfect," Jake beamed. A junior technician, looking utterly bewildered, was dispatched and returned with a triangular block used for calibrating laser arrays and a canister of coolant that had a low friction coefficient. Jake took the items. He walked to the floating artifact, which was now hovering just a few feet off the deck. He slid the wedge-shaped calibration block underneath it. "A little lower, Zorp." Zorp complied, his entire being trembling. The omen settled until its full weight rested on the small block, tilting it at a slight angle. This smudge, the inert spot, was now near the edge closest to Jake. "All right," Jake said, taking a deep breath. He jammed the end of the titanium strut into a thin seam right next to the inert spot, a seam that had been dismissed by Vex scans as a purely ornamental aesthetic flourish. "Stand back, fellas. This might get loud." He put his shoulder into it. He braced his feet. And he heaved. Vex began to emit a frantic stream of calculations. The structural integrity is being compromised. The tensile strength of the casing is being exceeded. This is an act of pure vandalism. But Kthar was watching the human. He saw the muscles in Jake's back and legs tense. He saw the sweat bead on his forehead. For a creature so small and soft, he was generating a surprising amount of torque. It wasn't the explosive power of a Grockner, but it was steady, relentless. It was the strength of persistence. With a groan of protesting alien metal, the strut bit deeper. Jake grunted, his face turning red with effort. And then, with a sound that was less of a bang and more of a deep, profound, universe-altering clunk, something gave way. The entire top half of the omen, which everyone had assumed was an integral part of its structure, shifted. It wasn't a puzzle box. It was a container. And Jake had just broken the seal on the lid. He took the canister of coolant and sprayed it liberally into the now visible seam. Then he repositioned the bar and gave another mighty heave. Slowly, ponderously, the massive artifact began to tilt. It pivoted on the edge of the calibration block, its immense weight now working with Jake, not against him. Higher and higher it went, until it passed its center of gravity. It crashed down onto the deck with a deafening boom that shook the entire station. It was upside down. And there, on what had been the bottom for 742 years, was not a smudge. It was a simple, recessed, circular panel. A hatch. And now that the object was inverted, the hatch, no longer held in place by its own immense weight and the pull of the weak gravimetric field, slid open with a soft, pneumatic hiss. Silence descended upon the chamber. It was a silence deeper and more complete than the vacuum of space outside. Zorp was utterly still, his gelatinous form frozen in a state of shock. Kthar's four jaws were hanging open. And Vex was emitting a low, continuous, high-frequency keen. It was the sound of a supercomputer dividing by zero. It was the sound of a perfect, logical mind shattering into a million irrational pieces. Inside the now open compartment lay a single, small, luminescent data slate and a tiny, perfectly preserved seed, nestled on a bed of black velvet. But how? Vex's projected voice was a faint, broken whisper. The calculations, the logic gates, the cosmic constants. It was all a distraction. Jake leaned on the strut, wiping sweat from his brow with the back of his hand. He was breathing heavily, but he had a triumphant grin on his face. Not a distraction, he panted. A misdirection. The oldest trick in the book. He walked over and picked up the data slate, turning it over in his hands. You guys live out here, in your sterile stations and your perfectly ordered worlds. You think the universe is a problem to be solved with math. You've forgotten that, at its heart, the universe is a physical place. It's messy. It's tricky. It has rules that have nothing to do with higher dimensional logic. What rules? Thar rumbled, his voice filled with a new, terrifying awe. Rule number 1, Jake said, holding up a finger. Gravity is a jerk. It holds things down. On my world, we have a name for it. Earth. High gravity, by galactic standards. We spend our entire lives fighting it. Learning to walk is a baby's first battle against planetary physics. We understand, in our bones, that up and down aren't abstract concepts. They have consequences. He gestured to the inverted omen. The precursors weren't testing your intelligence. They were testing your common sense. They built a box with a really, really heavy lid, put a simple gravity latch on it, and left it right side up. They figured anyone smart enough to find it would eventually get frustrated enough to just try flipping the whole damn thing over. They didn't count on anyone spending 7 centuries writing equations about the lock instead of just jiggling the door. You come from a death world, Vex whispered, the term a clinical classification, but now it sounded like an epithet of horror. We have studied the data. Unstable tectonics. Extreme weather. A biosphere locked in a perpetual, violent competition. Class 12 predators. Microscopic pathogens. We assumed it made your species savage and desperate. Oh, it did, Jake chuckled. But it also made us adaptable. It made us persistent. When a problem on Earth doesn't yield to brain power, we hit it with a rock. If the rock doesn't work, we get a bigger rock. We've got predators that can outrun us, outswim us, and outclimb us. You know how we survived? We just kept chasing them until they got tired and fell over. It's called persistence hunting. We weaponized being annoying. He leaned in, his voice dropping conspiratorially. You want to know what humanity's greatest strategic advantage is? It's that we look like this. He gestured to his own soft, unassuming body. We're underestimated. You look at me, and you see prey. You don't see a creature whose ancestors survived ice ages, supervolcanoes, and asteroid impacts. You don't see a creature that figured out how to split the atom with what is basically clever math and a few lumps of rock. You don't see a creature that regularly assembles IKEA furniture, which is a far more complex and maddening puzzle than this thing ever was. He paused, letting his words sink in. Your problem is that you've forgotten how to fail. Your simulations tell you when a path is illogical, so you abandon it. Humans? We fail constantly. We fail spectacularly. We have a whole system for it. It's called science. You try something. It fails, you try something else. Eventually, after you've tried all the smart things and they haven't worked, you start trying the stupid things. And every once in a while, one of the stupid things is the answer. He looked at the 3 dumbstruck aliens. You were so afraid of breaking your toy that you never actually played with it. You saw an exam. I saw a stubborn jar of pickles. The chamber was silent again, but this time it was a silence of profound, paradigm-shifting revelation. The galaxy was not a grand equation. It was a stubborn jar of pickles. And humanity, the soft, primitive, chaotic apes from the killer planet, were the only ones who remembered the trick to opening it. Zorp's mind, which usually ran on budgets and bylaws, was trying to process the geopolitical implications. A species that could bypass centuries of intellectual effort with a simple physical trick was not a minor power to be placated with diversity initiatives. They were a terrifying, unpredictable force. Thar, the warrior, looked at Jake's soft hands and saw, for the first time, not weakness, but the terrifying strength of a mind that refused to be bound by rules. To conquer an enemy by force was one thing. To conquer a problem by refusing to acknowledge its supposed complexity was another, far more potent, form of power. Vex was experiencing the Xyler equivalent of an existential crisis. His entire perception of the universe was built on the foundation of elegant, predictable logic. Jake had just taken a crowbar to that foundation. The universe wasn't elegant. It was clever. It was tricky. And the humans, the illogical, emotional, brutish humans, were its native children. The data slate. Vex finally managed, his voice a faint flicker of its former arrogance. The wisdom of the precursors, what does it say? All three of them leaned in, their centuries of failure hanging on this one moment. Perhaps this would explain everything. Perhaps it held the secrets of the cosmos. Jake squinted at the glowing text, which shifted into a script he could somehow read. He read it aloud, his voice flat and matter-of-fact. Item, Precursor Puzzle Box Model 7. Congratulations on solving the primary physical lock. For service, maintenance, and troubleshooting, please contact your local Precursor support unit. Note, inverting the device without first deactivating the internal gravimetric compensator may void the 500,000-year extended warranty. He looked up at them. Seems it's an instruction manual. And it looks like you guys voided the warranty on day 1-inch. He tucked the data slate into his satchel next to what looked suspiciously like a half-eaten bag of trail mix. He looked around the vast, silent chamber, at the dumbfounded alien geniuses and the cosmic puzzle that had been defeated by a principle he'd learned in a high school physics class. Right then, Jake said, clapping his hands together with an air of finality. Is there anywhere around here a guy can get a decent cup of coffee? He walked away, leaving the masters of the galaxy to stare at their overturned preconceptions, forever haunted by the chilling realization that the most powerful force in the universe wasn't logic or strength, but the simple, terrifying question of a creature who refused to believe that any box was too tricky to open.